Hello, this is Morel Bernard with the continuation of the story, Silver Fleece. An interesting story, Silver Fleece. Last words were, had he seen a haunt? Or was the elf girl real? And then he thought of her words, we's known us all our lives. And by the way, please subscribe to the channel and please share the video. Yeah, video 2. Okay, let us begin. Day was breaking above the white buildings of the Negro school and throwing long, low lines of gold in at Miss Sarah Smith's front window. She lay in the stupor of her last morning nap, after a night of harrowing worry. Then, even as she partially awoke, she lay still with closed eyes, feeling the shadow of some great burden, yet daring not to rouse herself and recall its exact form. Slowly again, she drifted towards unconsciousness. Bang, bang, bang! Hard knuckles were beating upon the door below. She heard drowsily and dreamed that it was the nailing up of all her doors, but she did not care much, and but feebly warded the blows away, for she was very tired. Bang, bang, bang! Persisted the hard knuckles. She started up, and her eye fell upon a letter lying on her bureau. Back she sank with a sigh and lay staring at the ceiling, a gaunt, flat, sad-eyed creature with wisps of grey hair half covering her baldness and a face furrowed with care and gathering years. It was 30 years ago this day, she recalled, since she first came to this broad lane or land of shade and shine in Alabama to teach black folks. It had been a hard beginning with suspicion and squalor around, with poverty within and without the first white walls of the new school home. Yet somehow, the struggle then, with all its helplessness and disappointment, had not seemed so bitter as today. Then failure meant but little. Now it seemed to mean everything. Then it meant disappointment to a score of ragged urchins. Now it meant 200 boys and girls, the spirits of 1,000 gone before and the hopes of thousands to come. In her imagination, the insignificance of these half-dozen gleaming buildings perched aloft seemed pretentious, big, with the destiny not simply of a county and a state, but of a race, a nation, a world. It was God's own cause, and yet, bang, 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 again went the hard knuckles down there at the front. Miss Smith slowly arose, shivering a bit and wondering who could possibly be rapping at that time in the morning. She sniffed the chilling air and was sure she caught some lingering perfume from Mrs. Vanderpool's gown. She had brought this rich and rare apparelled lady up here yesterday because it was more private, and here she had poured forth her needs. She had talked long and in deadly earnest. She had not spoken of the endowment for which she had hoped so desperately during a quarter of a century. No, only for the $5,000 to buy the long-needed new land. It was so little beside what this woman squandered. The insistent knocking was repeated louder than before. "Sakes alive!" cried Miss Smith, throwing a shawl about her and leaning out the window. "Who is it? And what do you want?" Please, Mum, I've come to school, answered a tall black boy with a bundle. Well, why don't you go to the office? Then she saw his face and hesitated. She felt again the old motherly instinct to be the first to welcome the new pupil, a luxury which in later years the endless push of details had denied her. Wait, she cried shortly, and began to dress. A new boy, she mused. Yes, every day they strangled in. Every day came the call for more, more. This great, growing thirst to know, to do, to be. And yet that woman had sat right here, aloof, imperturbably, listening only courteously. When Miss Smith finished, she had paused and flicking her glove. My dear Miss Smith, she said softly with a tone that just escaped a drawl. My dear Miss Smith, your work is interesting and your faith marvellous, but frankly, I cannot make myself believe in it. You are trying to treat these funny little monkeys just as you would your own children, or even mine. It's quite heroic, of course, but it's sheer madness, and I do not feel I ought to encourage it. I would not mind 1,000 or so to train a good cook for the Cresswells, or a clean and faithful maid for myself. For Helene has faults, or indeed deft and tractable labouring folk for anyone. But I'm quite through trying to turn natural servants into masters of me and mine. I hope I'm not too blunt. I hope I make myself clear. You know, statistics show. Drat statistics, Miss Smith had flashed impatiently. These are folks. Mrs. Vanderpool smiled indulgently. To be sure, she murmured. But what sort of folks? God's sort. Oh well. But Miss Smith had the bit in her teeth and could not have stopped. She was paying high for the privilege of talking, but it had to be said. God's sort, Mrs. Vanderpool. Not the sort that think of the world as arranged for their exclusive benefit and comfort. Well, I do want to count. Miss Smith bent forward. Not a beautiful pose, but earnest. I want you to count, and I want to count too. But I don't want us to be the only ones that count. I want to live in a world where every soul counts. White, black, and yellow, all. That's what I'm teaching these children here, to count, and not to be like dumb, driven cattle. If you don't believe in this, of course, you cannot help us. Oh, your spirit is admirable, Miss Smith, she had said very softly. I only wish I could feel as you do. Good afternoon. And she had rustled gently down the narrow stairs, leaving an all but imperceptible suggestion of perfume. Miss Smith could smell it yet as she went down this morning. The breakfast bell jangled. $5,000, she kept repeating to herself, greeting the teachers absently. $5,000. And then on the porch, she was suddenly aware of the awaiting boy. She eyed him critically. Black, 15, country-bred, strong, clear-eyed. Well, she asked in that brusque manner, where with her natural timidity was wont to mask her kindness. Well, sir, I've come to school. We can't teach boys for nothing. The boy straightened. I can pay my way, he returned. You mean you can pay what we ask? Why, yes. Ain't that all? No. The rest is gathered from the crumbs of Dives' table. Then he saw the twinkle in her eyes. She laid her hand gently upon his shoulder. If you don't hurry, you'll be late to breakfast, she said with an air of confidence. See those boys over there? Follow them. And at noon, come to the office. Wait, what's your name? Blessed Alwyn, he answered, and the passing teachers smiled. Miss Mary Taylor did not take a college course for the purpose of teaching Negroes. Not that she objected to Negroes as human beings, quite the contrary. In the debate between the senior societies, her defense of the 15th Amendment had been not only a notable bit of reasoning, but delivered with real enthusiasm. Nevertheless, when the end of the summer came and the only opening facing her was the teaching of children at Miss Smith's experiment in the Alabama swamps, it must be frankly confessed that Miss Taylor was disappointed. Her dream had been a postgraduate course at Bryn Mawr, but that was out of the question until money was earned. She had pictured herself earning this by teaching one or two of her specialities in some private school near New York or Boston or even in a Western college. The South she had not thought of seriously, and yet knowing of its delightful hospitality and mild climate, she was not averse to Charleston or New Orleans. But from the offer that came to teach Negroes, country Negroes, and little ones at that, she shrank, and indeed probably would have refused it out of hand had it not been for her queer brother, John. John Taylor, who had supported her through college, was interested in cotton. Having certain schemes in mind, he had been struck by the fact that the Smith School was in the midst of the Alabama cotton belt. Better go, he had counselled sententiously. Might learn something useful down there. She had been not a little dismayed by the outlook, and had protested against his blunt insistence. But John, there's no society, just elementary work. John had met this objection with as he left for his office. Next day he had returned to the subject. Been looking up Toombs County. Find some Cresswells there. Big plantations. Rated at $250,000. Some others, too. Big cotton county. You ought to know, John, if I teach Negroes, I'll scarcely see much of my people in my own class. Nonsense, but it. Show off. Give 'em your Greek and study cotton. At any rate, I say, go. And so, howsoever reluctantly, she had gone. The trial was all she had anticipated, and possibly a bit more. She was a pretty young woman of 23, fair, and rather daintily moulded. In favourable surroundings, she would have been an aristocrat and an epicure. Here she was teaching dirty children, and the smell of confused odours and bodily perspiration was to her at times unbearable. Then there was the fact of their colour. It was a fact so insistent. So fatal, she almost said at times that she could not escape it. Theoretically, she had always treated it with disdainful ease. What's the mere colour of a human soul's skin? She had cried to a Wesley audience, and the audience had applauded with enthusiasm. But here in Alabama, brought closely and intimately in touch with these dark-skinned children, their colour struck her at first with a sort of terror. It seemed ominous and forbidding. She found herself shrinking away and gripping herself lest they should perceive. She could not help but think that in most other things they were as different from her as in colour. She groped for new ways to teach coloured brains and marshal coloured thoughts, and the result was puzzling both to teacher and student. With the other teachers, she had little commerce. They were in no sense her sort of folk. Miss Smith represented the older New England of her parents, honest, inscrutable, determined, with a conscience which she worshipped and utterly unselfish. She appealed to Miss Taylor's ruddier and daintier vision, but dimly and distantly as some memory of the past. The other teachers were indistinct personalities, always very busy and very tired and talking schoolroom with their meals. Miss Taylor was soon starving for human companionship, for the lighter touches of life, and some of its warmth and laughter. She wanted a glance of the new books and periodicals and talk of great philanthropies and reforms. She felt out of the world, shut in, and mentally anemic. Great as the Negro problem might be as a world problem, it looked sordid and small at close range. So, for the 100th time, she was thinking today as she walked along up the lane back of the barn and then slowly down through the bottoms. She paused a moment and nodded to the two boys at work in a young cotton field. Cotton? She paused. She remembered with what interest she had always read of this little thread of the world. She had almost forgotten that it was here within touch and sight. For a moment, something of the vision of cotton was mirrored in her mind. The glimmering sea of delicate leaves whispered and murmured before her, stretching away to the northward. She remembered that beyond this little world it stretched on and on. How far did not know, but on and on in a great trembling sea, and the foam of its mighty waters would one time flood the ends of the earth. She glimpsed all this with parted lips, and then sighed impatiently. There might be a bit of poetry here and there, but most of this place was such desperate prose. She glanced absently at the boys. One was Bless Alwyn, a tall, black lad. Bless, she mused. Now, who would think of naming a boy Blessed, save these incomprehensible creatures? Her regard shifted to the green stalks and leaves again, and she started to move away. Then her New England conscience stepped in. She ought not to pass these students without a word of encouragement or instruction. Cotton is a wonderful thing, is it not, boys? She said rather primly. The boys touched their hats and murmured something indistinctly. Miss Taylor did not know much about cotton, but at least one more remark seemed to call for. How long before the stalks will be ready to cut? She asked, carelessly. The father boy coughed, and Blessed raised his eyes and looked at her. Then after a pause, he answered slowly, Oh, These people were so slow. Now a New England boy would have answered and asked a half dozen questions in the time. Uh, I, I don't know, he faltered. Don't know? Well, of all things, inwardly commented Miss Taylor. Literally born in cotton, and, oh well, as much as to say, what's the use? She turned again to go. What is planted over there? She asked, although she really didn't care. Goobers, answered the smaller boy. Goobers? Uncomprehensibly. Peanuts, Bless specified. Oh, murmured Miss Taylor. I see. There are none on the vines yet. I suppose, though, it's too early for them. Then came the explosion. The smaller boy just snorted with irrepressible laughter and bolted across the fields. And Bless was, or Miss Taylor, deceived. Or was he chuckling? She reddened, drew herself up, and then, dropping her primness, replied, or rippled with laughter. What is the matter, Bless? She asked. He looked at her with twinkling eyes. Well, you see, Miss Taylor, it's like this. Farming don't seem to be your speciality. The word was often on Miss Taylor's lips, and she recognized it. Despite herself, she smiled again. Of course it isn't. I don't know anything about farming. But what did I say so funny? Bless was now laughing outright. Why, Miss Taylor, I declare, goobers don't grow on the top of vines, but underground, on the roots, like yams. Oh, is that so? Yes. And we don't pick cotton stalks except for kindling. I must have been thinking of hem. But tell me more about cotton. Her eyes lighted, for cotton was to him a very real and beautiful thing, and a lifelong companion, yet not one whose friendship had been coarsened and killed by heavy toil. He leaned against his hoe and talked half dreamily. Where had he learned so well that dream talk? We turn up the earth and sow it soon after Christmas. Then pretty soon there comes a sort of greenness on the black land, and it swells and grows and shivers. Then stalks, shoots up with 3 or 4 leaves. That's the way it is now, see? After that, we chop out the weak stalks, and the strong ones grow tall and dark, till I think it must be like ocean, all green and billowy. Then come little flecks here and there, and the sea is all filled with flowers. Flowers like little bells, blue and purple and white. Ah, that must be beautiful, sighed Miss Taylor, wistfully, sinking to the ground and clasping her hands about her knees. Join me for the next video of Silver Fleece. Join me, Morale Bernard, for the next video of Silver Fleece. Look forward to seeing you then. See you then.